The famous one.
Good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Dalid in Sanhedrin, and we are going to be continuing our discussion from yesterday. We're going to have a little bit of Rashi. We'll have a very, very, very famous Tosfos that everybody here should learn and know because it's the one that we apply every day as we learn daf Yomi. And so let me share my screen and we'll get started. So. Yesterday we began the third chapter of Masechet Sanhedrin, and the opening Mishnah contained three debates between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. So we'll go through the first two we've defined. The last one, we are trying to figure out exactly what it means. So let's see. So the first debate, as per the Gemara's conclusion, Rabbi Meir says that the litigants select the third judge. That again, everybody agrees that each litigant selects one judge. And then Rabbi Meir says the litigants select the third judge with the approval of the judges that they each already selected. And the Chachamim say, no, it's not the litigants who make the decision, it's the judges who make the decision. The judges pick the third judge. And again, without any input from the litigants. I should probably have a closed parentheses at the end of that line. Okay, the second debate, as per Rabbi Yochanan, was Rabbi Meir says a litigant may disqualify the judge selected by his opponent if the judge is not certified as not a certified expert / ordained. So if he's not a mumcha, so then he's going to a litigant has the ability to say, I don't want this person to serve as judge, and just that will be sufficient. Chachamim saying no. As long as the judge selected by the other litigant is kosher, i.e. he's not a relative or otherwise ineligible, he can't be disqualified by the first litigant. So that's the debate. That was debate number two. Now, the problem with that debate, and the question that we had, is that it makes a question about the third debate. The third debate, the literal reading of the third debate, was Rabbi Meir says a litigant may disqualify the witnesses brought by his opponent. And the Chacham say, no, the witnesses may only be disqualified if their relatives are invalid. So the question is if in fact Rabbi Meir is to be taken literally, so then how can that be? Because witnesses are considered like certified experts / ordained judges, meaning that you shouldn't be able to do that. According to Rabbi Meir, you shouldn't be able to undo their service. You shouldn't be able to reject them. And so we came up yesterday with three ways to understand that third debate. The first way we rejected, the first way sort of said, let's change the wording of the Mishnah. And so that was Reish Lakish. And he said in a beautiful language of what did he say? He said, Pek Kadosh Yomar Davar Zeh. Could a holy mouth like this, like the Rebbe Meir's, say such a thing? And we're going to look at that statement in a little bit closer detail shortly. But the bottom line is that his explanation ends up being rejected. It's inconsistent with the wording of the Mishnah. And so as a result, we ended up with two other explanations. Rabbi Elazar suggested that the litigant and another witness would can come together to invalidate the other litigants' witnesses based on family history. So again, I bring Shlomi and Micha as my witnesses against Stan to say that he owes me $1,000. Stan and Mark come and say that Shlomi and Micha are both from families of slaves. And so as a result, their whole families are not kosher, and that's the situation. According to Rebbe Meir, that disqualification is allowed, because even though Stan would not be able to testify about Shlomi and Micha directly, because he'd be considered a partial witness, and so as a result, a biased witness, and so as a result, we wouldn't believe him. When it comes to their families and it's just indirectly affecting Shlomi and Micha, so then Stan is a very legitimate witness. And so, according to Rebbe Meir, and of course the Chachamim say, no, you that doesn't work. You're still biased. And so that was explanation number 2 that we had. Explanation number 3 that we had, Rav Dimi said in the name of Rav Yochanan, that we're talking about where I come to court and I say I have 2 sets of witnesses. I have Shlomi and Micha, and then I've got Yehuda and Ruvain. And so as a result, now I've only brought Shlomi and Micha. And so as a result, Stan, according to Rebbe Meir, has the ability to say that the families of Shlomi and Micha have a problem because he's not considered biased against specifically them, because I've got another set of witnesses hanging in the winds. And not only that, according to Rebbe Meir, I have to bring those other set. So it's not as if by invalidating this set of witnesses, Stan is making me do something that I wouldn't have to do otherwise. And so as a result, according to Rebbe Meir, that is totally fine. On the other hand, the Chachamim say, no, I don't have to bring in Ruvain and Yehuda. I don't have to bring them in as witnesses. And since I don't have to bring the second set in as witnesses, if Stan testifies against my first set, that's really a problem. He's considered biased. And so as a result, Stan does not have the ability to testify against it. And so that leads us now to an approach by Ravin. Often we see that we have Rav Dimi coming from Eretz Yisrael and saying something in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and then Ravin coming from Eretz Yisrael and saying something in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and they're disagreeing. Although often there's just a little bit of a distance between them. Here it's going to initially look like there's a big distance, and then we're going to end up saying that they're so similar that what's the difference between them at all? So let's take a look. So we are on the last line of Kaf Gimel Amabet. Ki asa Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So when Ravin came, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, Reisha. Now here, although Reisha usually means the very first part of the Mishnah, we're really discussing the last 2 cases in the Mishnah. So the Reisha here refers to the second case of the Mishnah, meaning the situation where we're going to let Stan disqualify judges. So be'edim, psulin, v'dayanin ksherim. We're dealing with a situation of invalid witnesses, but valid judges. And let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi helps us out understand what exactly we're talking about. Top Rashi on Kaf Daled Amud Aleph. Baal din posel hadayanin be'ha'edim. So Stan comes and says that the judge that I picked out is not a good judge, and the witnesses that I've brought are not good witnesses. V'nimtzvu dvarav emes al ha'edim. And we confirm what Stan has said. Stan brings witnesses to support him with respect to my witnesses, and so my witnesses are now invalid. Umishum hachi. And because Stan has said 2 things, he said that the judge that I selected is invalid and the witnesses that I said they are invalid. And he's proven that my witnesses are invalid. So because of all of that, remarkably, Ravin is saying we will believe him with respect to the judge. So Migu, back into the Gemara, second to last word on the first line, Migu de pasli edim, pasli nami dayane. Since we see that he is honest and you have proven the truth of your statement with respect to the witnesses, we are going to believe you that the judge also should be disqualified. So Seifa, and now what's the last case of our Mishnah? The last case of our Mishnah is Badayanin Psulin ve'edim ksherim. Again, same situation. Stan says that my witnesses are not good and the judge I chose is not good, but now he's proven his case against the judge, but he's not proven the situation against the witnesses. Demigu de pasli dayanin pasli nami edin. And since he has already invalidated my judge with witnesses, we're going to allow him to invalidate my witnesses even without any additional witnesses. So Maskif Rava said, 1 second, that can't be. It can't be that we're going to allow you to disqualify my witnesses. So Bishlam amigo de Pasli Adam de Pasli Nami Dayano, we can understand why we would allow Stan's testimony alone to invalidate one of the judges that I chose, because a judge is not so crucial to my case. And so as a result, Ika Dina Achrina, you could always find another judge. You could always find another court. El amigo de Pasli Dayane Pasli Nami Adam. But 1 second, if we allow Stan to use the fact that he's got witnesses against my judge to also then invalidate my witnesses, then Adam Tuleka, I don't have other witnesses. He's undone my entire case without any additional support. That shouldn't be. So the Gemara clarifies. Lo, tzricha deika kasacheres. No, we're dealing with a situation where I where I tell the court I've brought 2 sets of witnesses. And so, I've got 2 sets of witnesses. And so according to Rebbe Meir, he allows it because I've got another set of witnesses. And so as a result, even though Stan has not proven his case against my witnesses, since he's proven the case against my judge, we'll believe him against my witnesses. So haleka kasacheres mai. What's the law if in fact I didn't have another rule, another set of witnesses? So hachinami delo matzi pasli. Then of course he would not be able to invalidate my first set of witnesses. Well, 1 second. Hainu de Rav Dimi. Well, now we ended up in a situation where the situation is almost identical to Rav Dimi. In fact, at quick glance, it looks identical. Because Rav Dimi said, in the case where I say that I've got 2 sets of witnesses, Stan has the ability to testify against the first set. Wow. And in Ravin's case, the same situation. If I have 2 sets of witnesses, he can testify against the first set. And if I only have 1 set, both Ravin and Rav Dimi both say that Stan can't testify at all. So what's the difference between them? So Iku Benayu, Migu Demar Savar, Amrina Migu Umar Savar Lo Amrina. No, the point is that according to Rav Dimi, Stan needs to have a co-witness so that there are 2 witnesses testifying against my witnesses to make them problematic. But when there's only 1, even though he's testified successfully, he's brought witnesses against my judge, we're not going to allow him to undermine my witnesses all by himself. Whereas Ravin says, yes, we will allow Stan to undermine my witnesses all by himself, just because he's got witnesses that have undermined the judge that I chose. Wow. So that is the 4th and final explanation. And so in the end, we've got 3 different explanations that work. Reish Lakish we rejected, but we have Rabbi Lazar, we have Rav Dimi, and we have Ravin. And we have those 3 approaches.
At what point do we know that the first litigant has 2 sets of witnesses? Can he hide them in abeyance and then, oh, by the way, you apostled the first set, I have another set of witnesses? Or does he have to reveal that at the beginning as 2 sets of witnesses, which would
That is an excellent question, and I do not know the answer to that question. It seems like, from what we've seen so far, so I can only say, based on what we've seen so far, I did not need to mention both sets at the beginning. And it is only to my detriment to have done so. And what I should say is I should come in with 1 set, and then if it turns out that Stan disqualifies my first set, then I could say to the court, I've got another set. That seems to be the correct approach and what a litigant should do. A litigant should not ever try to claim that they have more support than they actually have, because again, some opinions would say, again, based on the Gemara, I don't actually think we paskin this way, but some opinions would say that you have to come in with the second set if you say you have two sets of witnesses. So that is an important element. So but at the I think presumably I believe we paskin not like the same the situation where that you have to bring in the second set. That in fact we paskin that you don't have to bring in the second set of witnesses. And so in the end, it probably doesn't matter whether you mention it or not. But I would say your best bet is to come in, bring one set of witnesses, not worry about the second set, and then only if the first set gets invalidated, then you say, listen, I've got another set of witnesses. Give me some time to try and bring them in instead. Okay. So now the Gemara looks at Reish Lakish's answer yesterday. Gufa, we said, what was it that we said? Reish Lakish pek kadosh yomar dabar zet tanei aido. Would a holy mouth say this? So therefore, we should instead say that he was saying one witness and not two witnesses. Aini, does that sound like our Reish Lakish? V'ha'amar Ula said about Reish Lakish, haroa esle Reish Lakish bebeis hamidrash kiu oker harim v'tochanan zebezeh. Reish Lakish was a fierce man who would lift up mountains metaphorically and grind them against one another in order to find the truth. He wasn't a kind of person who would reference Pek Kadosh Yomer's Davar Zed, that this holy person. I mean, he would argue with Rabbi Yochanan very severely. Indeed, of course, when Reish Lakish passes away and they try to find a replacement for him, Rabbi Yochanan is despondent because nobody is willing to challenge him the way Reish Lakish challenged him. So is that really the case? So Amar Ravina v'halo kol haroa Rabbi Meir beveis hamidrash ki'u oker harei harim v'tochanan zebezeh. Now, but you have to remember who Rabbi Meir was, that about whom Reish Lakish was saying such nice things, that it was Rabbi Meir, it was the one who people would say that if you saw Rabbi Meir studying, it would be not like just uprooting mountains and grinding them against, he would uproot the biggest of mountains in order to grind them against one another. And so
How big is the mountain?
I don't know, maybe it's like Mount Everest.
Oh, wow.
And so they would, the point is that Reish Lakish, as a result, who came obviously many generations later, had this great respect for somebody who was essentially an even greater version of him. And so as a result, it's not so surprising that Rabbi Meir would speak that way about, Reish Lakish would speak that way about Rabbi Meir. So, and Hagi Kamar, this is what he's saying, and this is what we're effectively saying. Bo urei kama mechavvin zetze. See how much the Torah scholars loved one another and appreciated one another. And now we're going to distinguish those who were in Eretz Yisrael, like Rabbi Meir and Reish Lakish, from those who were not in Eretz Yisrael. Ki hadi Yosef Rebbe v'kamar asur lahatmin es hatzonin. Look at what happened when Rebbe said that it is prohibited to insulate cold. Meaning, if you wanted, just as you're not allowed to insulate hot on Shabbos, and therefore, in order to keep things hot, you're all, in certain situations, you're also not allowed to insulate cold things to keep them cold. At least that was his initial statement. Amr lefan of Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yossi, said, Abba, my father, hitir lahat min esatzon. He says it's totally permitted. Amr lahem kvar hora zakein. So Rebbe said immediately to his students, if the elder has already ruled on this, so then I'm done. I'm not going to rule on it. So he retracted his statement. Amarav Papa, Bo Urei, Kama Mechavin Zedze. See how nicely these rabbis treat one another. De'ilu Rabbi Yossi Kayim v'haya kafa v'yoshev l'fnei Rebbe. Because if in fact, even though Rabbi Yossi was older than Rebbe, if he had been alive, he would have subordinated himself to Rebbe. And we know that this is true, but the Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi, Mimali, Mikom, Avosav Rabbi Yishmael was as great as his father, V'hayakaf v'yoshev lifnei Rebbe, and yet he himself also sat before Rebbe. V'ka'amar kvar horazakin, and yet nonetheless, Rebbe says that if Rabbi Yossi already issued his ruling, I'm not going to interfere with it. Yeah. It shows a degree of respect and honor that they showed one another. Rabbi Oshia, my dixiv. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cite some verses that effectively show that this is the way they treated one another in Eretz Yisrael, but unfortunately in Bavel, they were a little less respectful. Wow. So let's see exactly what we're talking about. So here we go. Rama Rabbi Yoshia, my dixiv ve'ekach li shnei maklos la'achad karasi noam la'achad karasi chovlim, and I took for myself 2 staffs. One I called gracious, and one I called assaulters. So Noam elu talmidei chachamim shebe'eretz Yisrael sheman imin zel zel bahalacha. That when it comes to the gracious, that's why that represents the Torah scholars in Eretz Yisrael, because they are gracious to one another in connection with, and respectful in connection with discussing the halacha, discussing the law. But when it comes to the assaulters, that's the way they teach you, they deal with things in Bavel. They are much more violent in their rebukes of one another and in their attacking on one another. But Yomer, and we've got another case that shows the same thing. Elishnei b'nei hayitzhar ha'omdim, that these are the 2 sons of the oil who stand. And then earlier it said Ushnayim zeisim aleha, and there are 2 olive trees that are next to it. So Yitzhar, when it comes to the oil, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak elu talmidei chachamim sheberetz Yisrael shenochin l'zeh l'zeh b'halacha kishem and zayis. That when it comes to oil, that represents the scholars in Eretz Yisrael, because this oil is gentle with one another. You use it as a salve, as a to soothe pains and aches and etc. But the olive trees themselves, those are the Talmidei Chachamim shebebavel that are in Bavel. Shemerurin zelazeh b'halacha kizayis. If you try to have a leaf of an olive tree, presumably it's bitter, and so as a result, that's the scholars in Bavel, because they would be brash with one another.
That's the oils for salads.
The oils for lots of good things. Oil is wonderful. The esa einai, another pasuk. The esa einai ve'erev vehine shtayim nashim hayotzos v'ruach b'chanfeyen. That I lifted my eyes. This is Zechariah speaking, and saw that there are 2 women that came out, and they had wind was in their wings. V'lahena kanafayim kechanfei hachasida, and they had wings like a stork. V'tisena es ha'efa, and they lifted up the ephah ben haaretz uben hashamayim, between the land and the heavens. And so the Yomer El Hamalach, and then Zechariah says to the angel Hadover Bi, who is speaking to him, Ana Hema molichot as ha'efa. Where are they taking that weight of presumably flour, possibly? But Yomer Eli live nosla bias be'eretz Shinar, that they're taking it in order to build a house in Shinar. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, zu chanufa v'gasus ruach. This was the sanctimony, the righteous, the inappropriate sense of being right and arrogance that went to Bavel. And so, as a result, that's the concept of the fact that these scholars in Bavel don't treat each other in a nice way. Because haruach leBavel nachis. 1 second, did arrogance actually go to Bavel? B'hamar mar, we have a statement that asara kabin gasus yardula olam, that there were 10 kav of haughtiness that came to the world. Tisha natla elam 9 of them went to Elam, but Achas kol alam kulo, and 1 went to the rest of the world. And Elam isn't Bavel. Elam is essentially Persia, which is east of Bavel. The Ein levavel nachas. So yes, that is true. Levavel nachas. First, it went to Bavel. The Ishtar Buve. The Ishtarbev le'elam, and then it went along and moved to Elam. But originally, you're absolutely right. It was in Bavel. So Dekanami, and in fact, you can understand the fact that it didn't stay in Shinar, which is in Bavel. Diksiv livnot la bayit be'eretz Shinar, in order to build a house for it singular. La for her singular, but for it singular, so that only one of the 2 women would settle in Bavel, namely the woman of that represents the woman that represents being sanctimonious, but the woman that represents haughtiness, she eventually left and went to Elam, went to Persia. Shma mina. So that actually is a good proof. V'amar mar simin lagasus haruach anius. Well, 1 second. Doesn't the fact that people in Bavel are really poor show that they are arrogant? Because v'anius leBavel nachas, because poverty went down to Bavel, and so as a result, doesn't that show that the arrogance stayed in Bavel? No, it does not, because my anios, what is the poverty that we're talking about when we say that the people that being poor indicates arrogance? Anios Torah. It's a lack of knowledge in Torah that indicates arrogance. Diksiv achos lanu ketana uvishadayim ein la. That in Shir HaShirim it says our sister is young and she has no breasts. Namely, she doesn't have a knowledge of Torah that allows her to nourish others. Rabbi Yochanan zo elam shezachsa lilmod below zachsa lelamed. And that specifically refers to Elam, the place where we know that they got all the haughtiness. So, and it's because they were able to learn Torah, but they were not able to teach it. And if you can't teach it, that's not enough. You need to be able to learn it well enough that you can teach it. So my Bavel, what in the world does Bavel represent? Rabbi Yochanan, Belula b'mikra, Belula b'mishnah, Belula b'talmud. Now, if you were to ask me, I would say that at this point, this is still all speaking negatively against Bavel, and that we should say that this statement is a negative statement. That the point is that the problem that Rabbi Yochanan is identifying with Bavel is that you have the scripture and the Mishnah and the Talmud all mixed up together, and it's really a problem, and we need to clarify each of them individually. However, it seems like the most Mefarshim understand this as a moment of pivoting in the Gemara. That whereas we had been laying it on and criticizing the scholars in Bavel, we now change and we say, actually, Bavel represents something wonderful. It represents a depth of knowledge of Torah, a depth of knowledge of Mishnah, a depth of knowledge of Talmud. And similarly, b'machashakim Hoshivani Kimese Olam, that again, I would have thought that this is a negative thing, that it says that he placed me in darkness like the eternally dead. That sounds pretty negative. Amar Rebbe Yirmiyah, Zet Talmud Shel Bavel, and that's the Talmud of Bavel. Why is it considered in darkness? Because often, as we just saw 2 seconds ago, we don't know which of the 3 opinions that work in connection with Rabbi Yochanan we're actually going to hold like. It didn't tell us the conclusion. So as a result, there's this sense of arguments without any final conclusion in the in the Bavli. But at the same time, one could say that it's a beautiful thing, that actually that by enabling us to have multiple senses of where we could go, it frees us in order to say, what is our current situation? Where are we? And how can we both best apply all of these decisions to our current case? And indeed, the Tosfos that I mentioned is on here. If we take a look at the top Tosfos on Kaf Daled Amud Aleph, we're going to see this is a very classic, top Tosos in the Masechet. Really, one of the Tosos that everybody should really know. So, and because what is we say? Perish Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam explains the Talmud Shalanu anu potrim atzmeinu mimasha amru chachamim. That through learning Gemara alone, we fulfill the requirement of what is said in Maseches Avodah Zarah. La'olam yishalish adam shnosav shalish b'mikra, shalish b'mishnah, shalish b'shas. That although we're supposed to spend 1/3 of our time on scripture, 1/3 of our time on Mishnah, and 1/3 of our time on Talmud, so as a result, maybe we need to divide it. The answer is that actually the Talmud Bavli constitutes an incorporation of everything. And because of this concept of it all being mixed together, when we learn Talmud, that's enough. But Tosos ends, Afal Pikain, even though learning Talmud is sufficient, we're going to give ourselves a few moments every day in the very beginning of davening in order to fulfill this concept of learning scripture, Mishnah, and Talmud. What are we talking about? Afal Pikain anu korim b'chol yom parshas hatamid. In the initial opening part of davening, we read about the sacrifices in the Beit Hamikdash, and so if we take a look, it's a Parak Kaf Chet in Sefer Bamidbar. So we read about the daily sacrifice, the very beginning of that chapter. And then the Shonim b'Mishnas Ezehu Mekomen. And then we read the chapter of the Mishnah of Ezehu Mekomen, which is the 5th chapter of Zvachim, which is supposedly the only chapter in Mishnayos that has no debates in it. Now, interestingly, we don't always paskin like it, even though there are no debates in it. We saw at the beginning of Psachim some areas where it's not clear that we actually follow those anonymous Mishnayos in Zvachim, but nonetheless, it's a set of Mishnayos that deal with where the karbanot are brought and how their blood is sprinkled. And then the Gorsin Rabbi Yishmael Omer b'Shloshas Rei Midos, and then we read the Shloshas Rei Midos that Rabbi Yishmael has, the 13 principles of elucidation that we then apply to derive all law from the verses, from Torah, and that is a brisa in the Sifra, and so we fulfill in doing that, having that 1/3 of scripture, 1/3 of Mishnah, 1/3 of Talmud, and all learning, and that gives us the nourishment for the rest of the day. And now the rest of the day we can spend it, as according to Rabbeinu Tam, just on Talmud, and through that Talmud learning, we can understand and learn Chumash and Navi and Mishnah, etc. Okay. So that brings us to the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah is...
Well, wasn't Reish Lakish being critical of Reb Meir? Was he praising him or being critical? It seemed like he was
he was saying he's clearly wrong.
Right.
He couldn't mean that. But at the same time, he was saying it in a way that says he must have just misspoken. And so as a result, that is a very respectful way of speaking, as opposed to saying you were wrong. He says, could something like that come out of his holy mouth? Obviously, we are transmitting what Rebbe Meir said incorrectly. Now, in the end, we came up with other explanations that allow Rebbe Meir to be correct, other ways to qualify the case, but that was the concept. Okay, so now we get to the Mishnah that we cited yesterday.
The implication seemed to be that the scholars in Eretz Yisrael were of a higher level. They were more respectful. They were more respectful, maybe of a higher quality, and yet we
are learning the Bavli.
Talmud Bavli is the predominant Talmud that we use for halacha. The most of the Torah resided in Bavli. People would come from Eretz Yisrael, but Bavli was the preeminent Talmud rather than
100%. So there,
but we so to speak, we more or less paskin according to Bavli and not Yerushalmi.
100%. So there are two aspects of what you're highlighting. The easiest answer to address your comment is that we have a general understanding that we paskin based on the last deciding party within each era. And so as a result, because the Bavli came later and was able to consider the arguments in the Yerushalmi, we will generally paskin according to the Bavli. So that's with respect to paskening. There are some Rishonim that struggle with the question that you asked, which is, why are we giving so much respect to Bavli when it seems from this Gemara that we should be giving more respect to Yerushalmi? And they come up with answers that maybe it's only the Bavli in the early years of Bavel is what they were describing. So there are a number of different ways to go through it, but that's beyond the ability of me as a Daf Yomi teacher to get into that level of detail. So I'm not going to go into that, but the bottom line is that you make a great point, and Mefarshim need to grapple with that point to understand how this Gemara sits with our general attitude of giving dominance to the Gemara Bavli, Talmud Bavli. Okay, so we said yesterday that if I say that I will allow my father, that I'm okay with my father or your father serving as a judge, that I am bound by that, or at least according to the Chachamim, I'm bound by that. So this is the Mishnah that we were quoting. So Amar Lo, if a litigant says, Ne'eman alai Abba, I believe your father, and we'll see that it means to be a judge. Ne'eman alai Avicha, I believe my father, I believe your father. Ne'eman alai Shlosha Roe Vakar, I'm okay with having 3 shepherds of cattle serve as judges. So Rabbi Meir Omer, Yachal Laxar Bo. Rabbi Meir says that the person can reverse himself. The Chachamim Omrim, Eino Yachal Laxar Bo. He's not able to reverse himself. Hayachayev L'chaveru Shvua. If the one person was obligated to swear to the other person, now the oaths that you would make are an oath in the name of God. So V'amarlo, and the other person says, listen, you don't have to swear in the name of God. Just swear on your own life.
Wow.
So then Rabbi Meir Omer, Yachol Laxarbo. Rabbi Meir says that again, the litigant has the ability to say, you know what? I said that you should swear on your own life and not in the name of God, but I want you to go and swear in the name of God. And B'chamim Omrim, Ein Yachol Laxarbo. You don't have the ability to go back. So Amar Reb Dimi Braid the Reb Anachman Braid the Reb Yosef Kagon de Kable Ale Bechad. This is a situation where he accepts the litigant is accepting the father to serve as one, and Rashi helps us out here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 lines up where it says Gemara, de Kabli ale bechad, Dayana, he accepts him as one of the judges. And even though there are 2 other judges, so maybe I would say that you should definitely be forced to keep it. Bahade, other than him, Amar Rebbe Yameir, Yachol Laxabo, he's able to reverse himself and say that he doesn't need to keep it. Okay, so that's the background of our case. And so now the Gemara discusses the precise scope of the disagreement in our Mishnah. So
why is he allowed to accept the father? Isn't that Krovim? I mean,
yes, 100%. In a monetary case, you and I can agree that our relatives are allowed to testify. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel.
No. Wait a second. We say we can't allow Krovim.
Yes, no, this is that. That's what we're saying. 100%. You and I, if we both agree, if you and I are litigating a case and we say, I'm okay with our relatives testifying, and you say you're okay with our relatives testifying, we are going to see that you are absolutely able to do that. And if we make a kinyan, you cannot even go back on it.
So we're talking about Dayanim, not Adim here, right?
We're talking about everything. You
Everything?
could be Adim, you could be judges, either. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Machlokas b'macholach. So initially, I'm going to say that Rabbi Yehuda says, and we're going to get to the end. We'll see exactly the scope of all of this disagreement at the very end of the Gemara, and we'll even have halachic statements. So we'll get to exactly what we say in at the end of today. But hopefully we'll get there. So the machlokas is where I say that I am willing to forgive you. So if I'm forgiving the money, meaning I am the plaintiff, and I say that I'm willing to accept your father as a witness, so then that's where we argue. But if I am the defendant and I say such a statement, and I'm going to end up having to pay money, everybody agrees that you can undo it. Rabbi Yochanan says no. No, the machlokas is when I say that I will give you the money. And okay, so 1 second. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan says that when I give you, it's going to be the machlokas. But is he saying that therefore, if I'm the plaintiff and I allow you to not have to pay if your father comes to testify for you, I'm going to say that I don't have the ability to retract? Or maybe I can maybe our argument, the argument between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim in our Mishnah, maybe that argument is in both cases, whether I am the forgive you, whether I'm the plaintiff or the defendant. So Tashma de Amarava machlokas be'etein lecha. Rava says that the machlokas is only in with when I say I will give you. But if in fact I say that I will, I'm sorry, the machlokas is only if I say I'm going to give you the money, and based on your father's testimony. But if in fact I say that I will forgive you, then if I'm the plaintiff, I don't have the ability to go back on it if I say that I'm not going to charge you if your father testifies on your behalf. Now, if you say that when Rabbi Yochanan said that the machlokas is when I will give you, but then if I say it's forgiven, everybody agrees that I'm not allowed to retract, well then Rava da Amr Rabbi Yochanan. Then it makes a lot of sense. Rava is just saying like Rabbi Yochanan. Ela'i Amra bein bezu machlokas. But if you say that Rabbi Yochanan is saying that the machlokas is in both cases, Rava da Amr, come on. Who is Rava saying the halacha is like? The halacha is neither like Shmuel nor Rabbi Yochanan. Well, Rava Taima Denafshe Kamer. Rava can say his own opinion with respect to the scope of the machlokas. We are going to see a very similar language in the Gemara, and which comes to a different conclusion. But it's important to note that here, Rava is not saying the final outcome, the final halacha, but rather he is saying a third position of the nature of the dispute. So, but when it comes to the halakha, then we're going to see that it will be more problematic for Rava to not be consistent with Rabbi Yochanan. Esvei Rava Acha bar Takli v'le Rava. So Rava Acha asked the Rava, Hayachayim. So again, the end of our Mishnah said that if you're obligated to swear, you can say that you are allowing the person to swear on his own life instead of in the name of God. Rabbi Meir Omer Yachal Laxerbo, but Chachamim Omer Ein Yachal Laxerbo. Rabbi Meir says you can reverse yourself, and the Chachamim say you cannot. So in second, as we turn to Kavdal and Amabet, my laba Ozan Hanishban V'lo Mishalmin, isn't this a biblical oath that we're talking about, where one swears and does not pay, with dahavale kemacholach, which is just like the case of I've forgiven you. And yet Rava said in the case of I've forgiven you, everybody agrees that you're not allowed to rescind. And yet here Rabbi Meir is saying that you may rescind, you can reverse yourself. That we don't have to interpret the Mishnah that way. But Ozan Hanishpan v'notlin, we're dealing with a situation in those cases where one would swear and collect. And a swear and collect is very similar to I will give you. And so as a result, that is why Rabbi Meir will allow the person to say, who said you can swear on your own self and not on Hashem's name, I'm going to allow that person to reverse his opinion and change his mind and say that you have to swear in the name of God again. Well, 1 second. If that's true, then the debate with respect to the oaths is the same debate as with respect to allowing the father to testify or to be a judge. So Tana Tola Bidas Acherim. No, it's actually different, because in the case of the first case of I'm going to allow your father to testify, that's dependent on other people. Namely, the father needs to testify. B'tana Tola B'das Atzmo. But the second case is all about your himself, because it's everything is based on my ability to say to you that you are going to be allowed to make the oath in the name of yourself instead of Hashem's name. Utricha, and we actually need to have both machlokot, because because if I only allow you to have your father testify, so then Bahaka Amar Rebbe Meir Dematzi Hadar. Well, in that case, it may be that only there Rebbe Meir says that I can retract. Because Mishum Delo Gamar Umakni, because I don't know what your father's going to say. I'm going to say to myself, Da Amar Mi Yemer de Mizakila. Do I know that in fact your father is going to testify in your favor? Maybe not. Maybe he'll be honest. Aval Tola Bedas Atzmo. But when nothing is dependent on anybody else except for what I'm saying, namely, I allow you to swear on your father, on yourself, on your own name, on your own head, instead of swearing in the name of God, Ema Modi Lahulu Rabbanan. Maybe Rebbe Meir would admit and agree to the rabbis and say that I cannot reverse myself. And if you were to tell me that in the second case, where I say, where it's all dependent on me, that I allow you to reverse yourself, maybe it's only there that the rabbis say that the person may not retract. But in the other case, where it depends on what the father says, and we don't know what the father's going to say, maybe the rabbis would agree with Rebbe Meir and allow the person to retract. So tzricha. So therefore, we need to have both machlokot. And so as a result, our challenge to Rava has failed. So Amar Reish Lakish. So now the Gemara is going to discuss. So we've now gotten the scope of the nature of the machlokas, meaning is it the plaintiff or the defendant? And the answer at the moment is that it depends which view. We have three different viewpoints at the moment, potentially. We have Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel that says that it's only where the plaintiff says it and not where the defendant says it. We have Rabbi Yochanan who could say maybe that the machlokas is in both cases. And we have Rava who says that the machlokas is only where the plaintiff says it and not where the defendant says it. But now, so that's
what is he saying? When you say he says it, what you're saying
that I'm going to allow your father to testify.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I'm allowing your father to testify. So that's the statement. That's the it. So if I allow, so okay. So now we're going.
So wait, who is saying what? So the plaintiff, both of them have a father testifying, right?
No. We're focusing only in one direction. The question is who is the one who's allowing the other person's relative to testify? And so Rabbi Yehuda says it's that the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim is about the plaintiff saying it. The Rabbi Yochanan says it's about the defendant saying it and possibly also the plaintiff saying it. And Rava says that it's only where the defendant says it. But with the
well, whose father is testifying, the plaintiffs or the defendants?
Well, whoever's speaking, it's the other person's father who's going to testify.
And we're saying that he can maybe the machloket in one of the cases, or maybe is that one can retract the father's testimony.
No, not retract the father's testimony. Retract the allowance of the father to testify.
Oh, retract.
Okay, retract the allowance of the father to testify. Now the question is we've now talked about the who. Now we're going to talk about the when, and I think it'll help at the end. It'll all clear up. So let's take a look. Amaresh Lakish Machlokas Lifnei Gmar Din. The when can the person undo the testimony? It's only before the judgment was ruled. Aval la'achar gmar din, divrei hakol ein yachol lachzor bo. Then, but once the judgment was ruled, everybody agrees that you cannot retract. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan says, no, la'achar gmar din machlokas, that the machlokas is about after the judges ruled. And even though the judges have already ruled, Rabbi Meir says you're allowed to retract. The Chachamim say you can't, but Rabbi Meir says you can. Ibailahu la'achar gmar din machlokas aval lefnei gmar din divrei hakol yachol lachzor bo o dilma bein bezu machlokas. So when Rabbi Yochanan said that the machlokas is afterwards, is it also before, or does everybody agree that before you can retract? So Tashma da Amar Rava. Well, listen to what Rava says. And Rava here is going to have the ruling. Kiba alav karovo puzzle. If a litigant accepts upon himself a judge that's a relative or something, but who's ineligible, lifnei gemar din yachol lachzor bo, before the judgment, he's allowed to retract. La'achar gmar din ein yachol lachzor bo. But after the judgment, he's not able to retract. Now, amra bishlama la'achar gmar din machlokes aval lifnei gmar din divrei hakol yachol lachzor bo. Now, if in fact, when Rabbi Yochanan says that the machlokes is after the judgment, he means it's after the judgment, but not before the judgment. Well, then Rava de Amar Rabbi Yochanan va'aliba de Rabbanan. Then Rava is holding like Rabbi Yochanan and holding like the rabbis, namely that the rabbis say that you're allowed to retract before the verdict and you're not allowed to retract after the verdict. Ella amrat bein bezu machlokas. But if you say that the machlokas is in both cases, Rava de Amar, come on, who is Rava saying like? Rava's not saying like either Reish Lakish nor Rabbi Yochanan, neither according to the Chachamim. So we see that in fact the machlokas must be only after the judgment, but before the judgment, everybody allows the person to retract. Shma mina, and in fact, that is a good lesson. And therefore, what we see is the following. And so as a result, sorry, let me scroll. And so as a result, Rava is saying, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that that the machlokas is after the judgment, and so after the judgment, Rabbi Meir says you can retract. The Chachamim say you cannot. Now, in the end, we're going to see exactly how the halacha holds. Shloach le Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda le Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. So that the message was sent by Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda. So Yelamdenu Rabbeinu lifnei gemar din machlokas o la'achar gemar din machlokas. When is the dispute? Is it before or after gemar din? The halacha kedivrei me, and who's the halacha like? So shalach le la'achar gmar din machlokas v'halacha kedivrei chachamim. It's after the verdict is where the dispute is, and so the halacha is like the chachamim, namely that we see that in fact that that if it's before the judgment you can retract, but after the judgment you can't retract according to the chachamim. Rav Ashi Amar Hachi Shalach le. The message that was sent and received was the following: Is the machlokas about I'm going to give you, where it's the money, meaning that the plaintiff, the defendant said it, or is it where I'm going to forgive you the money, where the plaintiff said it? The halacha kedivrei me, and who's the halacha like? So shalach le, it was sent back to him. Betein lecha machlokas. The machlokas is where I'm going to give you the money, meaning the defendant says it. But halacha kedivrei chachamim, and the halacha is like the chachamim, meaning that you're not able to retract. So besura masni hachi, and in surah that's how they learned it. But pumpadisa masni hachi, but in pumpadisa they taught the following: Rabbi Chanina bar Shalemya shalchu le mibei Rav Shmuel. So the yeshiva of Rav sent to Shmuel. Yilamdenu Rabbeinu lifnei gemar din v'kanu miyado mai. What happens? Third case. What happens if even though it's still before gemar din, I say that Stan's father can testify, and I do a kinyan sudar. I lift up a pen and I say, and with this, I'm going to definitively give Stan the ability to bring his father to testify. So then, what's the story? So shalach lahu, Shmuel sent back to them, ein la'achar kinyan klum. There is nothing that can be done after a kinyan. So where do we end up? So let's talk. Let's do that.
That's not retraction.
What? Then you can't retract. Exactly.
No, but that's not retraction. The father hasn't spoken yet.
I understand, but you're not allowed to retract the right to give it. So let me just say the bottom line, and then you will ask your question. So if one performed a kinyan to allow somebody's father to serve as the judge, that's it. You're done. You cannot retract. Even if it's before the judgment, even if the case hasn't even started, you are not allowed to retract something as a result of you because you did a kinyan. If there was no kinyan, well, then you're allowed to retract before the verdict. And it doesn't make a difference whether it's a case of the plaintiff saying that I'm going to forgive you or the defendant saying I'm going to pay. It doesn't make a difference. Before the verdict, you can retract, and after the verdict, you cannot retract. So again, that's the bottom line, because we paskin like the Chachamim, not like Rebbe Meir. And so now I'm happy to take any questions.
How do we, now, are we, when we talk about retraction here, are we talking about a statement, let's say a testimony that someone has already given?
No. Well, somebody could have already given his testimony, but the retraction is my allowing you to bring as a witness your father or mother. Somebody to testify that it would not ordinarily be allowed to testify because they're biased. Or I say that we're going to allow one witness to be sufficient in our case. I'm not, if we make a kinyan, there's no going back. If we don't make a kinyan, well, then I can go back until the verdict, but after the verdict, I can't go back.
Well, but even that discussion, let's say, we had a discussion whether it would be allowed after the verdict, before the verdict. So if a person comes forward and makes a statement, I always had trouble with this. How can the judge says to the jury, strike the testimony you just heard, but they already heard the testimony. So in this case, so that, I mean, okay, you strike it, but they've already heard it. So if the father comes and makes a statement or a witness, any witness, and says, no, he can retract the statement, but the judges have already heard it. So it's hard to retract it from one's mind if he's already heard it. Yes, legally you're supposed to, but it's already in the mind. You heard it.
100%. In U.S. law, in those situations, if in fact there's just no way to overcome the bias that is likely to have existed, then usually you end up with a mistrial and you have to start over again. But here, given that we're talking about judges, well, first of all, if we're talking about the allowance of a judge, then effectively we're doing a mistrial. We're treating it like a mistrial. You can effectively cause a mistrial at any point that you can retract your right that you said that you're going to allow. If you say that you'll allow my father to serve as a witness, as a judge on our case, and then just before the case is done, you say, no, I'm not going to allow him to serve as a judge. So then we undo the entire case and we have to hear it again. 3 new judges, potentially need to hear the case. And if we're talking about a situation where you allow my father to serve as a witness, so then the good news is that, look, we respect our judges and we tell them that they have to ignore what my father said, and we have to treat the case as if my father didn't come to testify. Remember that in Jewish law, without witnesses, effectively, there is a very a high bar for me to come and collect money from you. And so as a result, if the judges, even if the judges know that what my father testified, if I only have one witness otherwise, well, then instead of you're paying me, you're going to have to swear. So, I mean, it's straightforward. It's a little more straightforward than in the cases that we're talking about. Because remember, we're only talking about monetary cases. We're not dealing with a criminal case where after the testimony and we're trying to question whether the person's innocent or guilty. That's not the kind of case we're talking about. It's a more straightforward case of trying to figure out exactly who owes the money, and do I have you signed on a contract or not. So I think that it's a little bit different from those cases that you were talking about of trying to strike testimony. But again, we will often judges will say that the testimony is not so prejudicial that we can allow the jury to have heard it and say, the jury needs to ignore it and pretend that they didn't hear it. And most people are able, obviously you can't forget it, but most people are able to say, I'm going to make a decision without factoring that into my decision. And that's what we request them to do. So next Mishnah, deals with the categories of those who are ineligible to serve as judges or witnesses, including those who engage in gambling, which is one of the most famous topics that you'll see in the Gemara, Masachet Pekuvia. But for that Mishnah, you're going to have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. So I
But
wish.
generally we say that Krovim are pasul eidut. How do we?
Correct. Absolutely.
So
What
how
we're
are we
saying,
allowing the father to be either a judge or a witness here?
what we're saying is effectively that the parties to a monetary case, because it's not there's on some level there the Rishonim deal with how, does this violate, are we somehow allowing something that is prohibited by the Torah? And the answer is that the parties to a case have the ability to reach an agreement that is on some level inconsistent with the Torah, just like in modern days, it is not recommended that you follow the Torah's procedures of inheritance. I would not recommend that you give everything to a firstborn male, or you give, a double portion to a firstborn male and give nothing to your daughters. That would not be good advice in today, notwithstanding the fact that the Torah gives outlines a particular path. In some circumstances, we say that it's okay for us to not do exactly what the Torah says. And here, where the parties themselves agree that we're going to allow Krovim to testify, or agree that we're going to allow Krovim to serve as judges, then they have the ability to do that. And the bottom line is that according to where we end up, they also have the ability to say in the middle of the case, before the verdict, hey, I want to change my mind. Now, if they do a kinyan, then they wouldn't even be able to do that. And that's how we end to basically say that we make all the parties effectively make a kinyan in order to confirm that they're not going to be able to undo the validity of the court of the Beis Din that they end up having here their case.
So how do we eliminate the potential of bias on the part of the father, the brother, whatever it may be, right?
The way you eliminate, you don't eliminate it. The point is that if in fact you are so concerned about it, you should not agree with me to allow our relatives to testify. So, you don't have to agree to this. You can go by the biblical rules. It's only if you think it's going to be better for you and I think it's going to be better for me, well, then we can allow it to go forward.
So, but on the opposite tack, could these two litigants also agree to allow other Adim or Dayanim, which we would normally think would be possible, like a woman, a slave, whatever? Could they say, well, we'll allow them too? Both parties agree. Could we allow? Would that
I
be
think that the
acceptable?
answer is yes. I think that the answer is yes. Absolutely. I think I'm pretty sure that the answer is yes. And in fact, that there are some who have made that case to say that things like Batei Din should allow women to serve as judges so long as the litigants agree to it. Absolutely. Again, in monetary cases. Yep, absolutely, 100%. All right, Yishikoach, thank you for asking that question. Have a great day, everybody. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.